The guns of the Old West. When did the Wild West end? The 1969 movie, The Wild Bunch by Sam Peckinpah. Yet again, thank you to the kind subscriber that sent me a message and asked me all about the guns of the Old West. When did the Old West end? The movie, The Wild Bunch, how authentic was the movie of The Wild Bunch? What guns did they use? It was a very long request. When I read the request, I thought to myself, I have wanted to make a movie about the Wild Bunch for a while. And when I went to do some research on it, I thought, how can I do it? I'm trying to keep my videos from becoming epic sagas. Nobody wants to see what was a ludicrously long movie. I guess A Bridge on the River Kwai. I want to see short, punchy videos. How on earth do you do that with a question like a subscriber raised? So what I thought is, let's see if we can address that issue. The guns of the Old West versus the movie The Wild Bunch. Now if you go researching The Wild Bunch, you'll see one of the things it gets from the critics, particularly gun critics, is how authentic it was. Now hang on, you say. Automatic Colt pistols, machine guns, and yet they say this is an authentic. Well, let's talk about it. So The Wild Bunch is set in 1913. Automatic, semi-automatic handguns fire, shot, 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 as opposed to revolvers. They were invented in the late 1800s, the 1890s. That's when they were invented. The broom-handle Mauser, they moved on, they perfected them. But it's clear to see they were invented 1890s, and the movie The Wild Bunch is set in 1913. Also, pump-action shotgun. Who doesn't love the sound of a ratcheting pump-action shotgun? Again, invented in the late 1800s, so perfectly fine to see a pump-action shotgun in the movie The Wild Bunch. Now let's move on, of course, to the biggie, which is the machine gun. So Henry Maxim, Englishman, strange name for an Englishman, who originally wanted the machine gun to fire square bullets if it wasn't shooting at Christians. Let's not go down that path. But anyway, that was invented too in the 1890s. So yet again, to see a machine gun being used in The Wild Bunch, perfectly authentic. As I say, many critics and experts have come down in praise of The Wild Bunch for its authenticity with the weapons it's used. Now when we talk about the Wild West, of course, we're all used to seeing the Colts, the revolvers, a myriad of stories about Colts and Smith & Wessons and revolvers. So what happened is around 1900, let's not be specific, but around 1900, the American Army was involved in conflict in the Philippines. The people it was fighting were fanatical, crazed tribesmen who took drugs so they didn't feel pain, a bit like in LA in the 70s and 80s when the druggies would take PCP, give them incredible strength. They could throw off 20 coppers because it did something in the brain to make their muscles act more. Let's not go down the road. Let's not go down that path. What we're going to stick to is the tribespeople took a certain drug. They felt no pain. The army at the time was issued with 38 long Colt revolvers. Not a big bullet with not a big projectile. And they were finding that they were shooting the natives, the tribesmen that were attacking them, and they just kept coming. So what happened is they immediately switched back to the Colt 45 revolver and called for the Colt 45 semi-automatic. So what happens now is we travel through to March of 1911 when, after tests and experiments, the US Army says, yes, we really like the semi-automatic Colt 45. We're going to call it the Colt 1911, and that's what we're going to adopt for our troops. And so in April, I think it was, of 1912, the first shipment of semi-automatic 1911 Colt semi-automatic pistols go to the US Army. So that is one tiny little glitch in the movie The Wild Bunch, in that the German general sees Pike, William Holden. William Holden's got a 1911. The movie's set in 1913. And the German general says to Pike, "How did you get that gun? You must be a criminal because only the military are supposed to have that gun." Well, again, what happens is, whether you want to call them they're not really haters, they're nitpickers. And I say that because I tend to be somewhat of a nitpicker when I'm watching movies too. And so the nitpickers went looking about that general in the movie making the comment, "How did you get that gun? Military only." And what you'll find about that quote, "Only the military should have that gun," the records show they've managed to track that on the 17th of July 1912, Colt 1911 45 semi-automatic was shipped from the factory. Its serial number was C380, so it was the 380th one made, and it went to a hardware store in San Francisco for private sale. You can look all that up in more detail if you need to, but that just shows that was one thing not quite accurate. Civilians could buy them, but only if you were in a position. It's not like you go online, and they were pretty hard to come by. This also brings me to another movie, which is Titanic, that massive hit, James Cameron's Titanic. That was a very long movie with DiCaprio in it. And in that movie, a guy threatens DiCaprio with a Colt 1911. The ship sank in April of 1912. The ship sank in April of 1912, and a man on the gun, the ship sank in April 12th, I think, of April 1912, and in the movie, a man threatens DiCaprio with a Colt 1911, and the first record of one of those guns going to a civilian hardware store for sale was July of 1912. So the nitpickers, they say, highly unlikely there could have been a Colt 1911 on the Titanic in April of 1912. But the other side of the coin is, who's to say it wasn't obtained by some special deal, mates who knew mates. And I've made another video about Lawrence of Arabia and how Lawrence of Arabia had a pair of Colt 45 semi-automatics. That's a separate video. Go check that one out. It's a fascinating story. Even though I say so myself. Not the video, the story's fascinating. Okay, where are we to? So just to clarify some of those other questions that were asked of me, when did the Old West or the Wild West officially end? Now, I've made a video about this, another video, but let's keep this bit short, which is anyone you ask, Old West sites, Wild West magazine, anybody who has everybody has their own opinion. When did the Wild West end? So let's say, how do you define that? How about we go by the Library of Congress? So in America, the Library of Congress, surely you can't have a bigger, more official site than that. The Smithsonian Institute, the British Museum. So if the Library of Congress said the Old West, the Wild West, officially ended in 1900, let's stick with that. So if the Old West and the Wild West finished officially in 1900, but the Wild Bunch was set in 1913, what does that mean? Well, it is another quintessential fabulous thing that I personally love about the Wild Bunch, because it's about a bunch of broken down old men at the end of their career. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. How are they going to live? They're frail. Look what happens when Pike struggles to climb on his horse and then the stirrup breaks. You know, he's a bit of a beat up old bloke, and he's still trying to make a living. So that's what happened. Yes, they were Outlaws. They were an outlaw band. They were successful. But the Old West finished in 1900 according to the Library of Congress, and they are an anachronism. Is that the right word? They are, or is that a spider? That's a joke. Anyway, moving on. So, 1900, supposed to have ended. The Wild Bunch is set in 1913, but these blokes came from when the Wild West still existed, and they're still trying to make their living illegally how they used to. But times have changed. They haven't moved on, and the world has moved on. So that is another great thing about the movie The Wild Bunch. Sam Peckinpah got in fearful trouble when he made the movie because of what was alleged to be gratuitous violence, and so much of the film was censored and cut out that nowadays, if you wouldn't believe it, if you can compare a censored version with the full-length version, a huge difference in what you see in the original movie, which is fantastic. So, gratuitous violence, a whole different type of editing and formatting and directorship. A brilliant job. How good is it? Again, the Library of Congress have saved this movie into the Library of Congress because they believe how important it is, and they believe it's historically significant from the perspective of the Old West changing, as well as from the perspective of cinematography. Sam Peckinpah had no idea the movie he was creating. I said to you, this was some significant request that was made to me because it was also about the Wild Bunch. So when Sam Peckinpah was preparing this movie, it is not based on any particular real event. It is not based on the Wild Bunch that really did exist, which was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with their Wild Bunch, a loose, coming and going, flowing group of criminals that operated under Butch and Sundance. That too is in another one of my videos. Go and search out that one too, or ask me and I'll give you the link to it. So what happened is around 1900, Butch and see, again, this thing about old men seeing the writing on the wall have to change. Butch and Sundance were wise enough to know they had to change. So they left and the Wild Bunch sort of fell apart. So when Peckinpah said his movie in 1913, it was nothing to do with Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. It was just a name he chose for this group of criminals, old-time Western criminals. And again, it wasn't based on any specific event, but what it was based on is Pancho Villa and the Mexican Revolution and all the ups and downs and ins and outs of the Mexican Revolution. Could not even attempt to cover that, other than to say, yes, Pancho Villa existed, yes, the revolution was taking place in 1913, yes, there was so much infighting, yes, Americans were going there as mercenaries. So that part is all true and authentic and based on things that happened, even though the Wild Bunch isn't based on Butch and Sundance Wild Bunch or a specific genuine event. So while we're talking about Pancho Villa and the Mexican Revolution and the comings and goings of Americans, 1916, punitive, I think is the word, punitive. The US cavalry went into Mexico fighting the Mexicans. A punitive raid into Mexico by the US cavalry, 1916. When they did this in 1916, they were armed with their Colt handgun, their Colt semi-automatic 1911s in .45 caliber. Now in 1959, a movie was made. If you haven't seen it, shame on you. You must go and see the movie. Now, let me make sure I pronounce it right. They Came to Cordura. They Came to Cordura. You have to see that movie. It's Gary Cooper and Rita Hayworth, and why do I say you have to see it? Because they get genuine, 1959, they get genuine US cavalry troops, and those troops are riding along in four abreast. So often when you see a Western movie, the cavalry are riding, all John Wayne movies, the cavalry are riding two abreast. Now why is that? It's because it helps keep the numbers down of how many extras they need in the show. They ride two abreast, and then you can see a long line two abreast. Now in reality, the US Cavalry, the British Cavalry, the Australian Light Horse, they rode four abreast. They did that for the reason, particularly with the Light Horse and the US Cavalry, which was the same, which is that one man was in charge of the four horses so that three could dismount and engage the enemy on foot if necessary. Rode in a section of four so they could do that. There's a couple of John Ford cavalry movies in which in the background you see the troops charging around the parade ground, practicing, one man on his horse, an empty horse on one side of him, two empty horses on the other side. And it's just wonderful to see that in the background of a couple of John Ford's cavalry movies. Just aerial photography that will blow your mind is exactly how, back in the day of the cavalry, they used to be riding along in sections of four, column of four, and then they would be in troops, and they would have to give orders, hand signals, that meant the troops, the sections slowly moved apart, and then the sections started to open up, and it all had to happen in a precise military way that eventually you went from a column of four, four horses riding along in a column, that you went and slowly they spread until you had the entire force of horses all riding along side by side, knee to knee, each man knee to knee. That is the only movie I've ever seen that shows so brilliantly how that happens, even better than in the Australian movie, The Light Horse. I'm not sure whether I should mention subscribers by name who make a suggestion, so in this one I'm not going to say who it was. Maybe I don't know if I embarrassed them by doing that, so I'm not going to do it this time. Certainly was a significant request that I said I was going to try and keep short. I'm not sure I've quite succeeded in that, old mate. But anyway, till we meet again, cheers and thanks for watching.